It began with a search for something mundane. A receipt for a piece of software Liam needed for our taxes. He was notoriously disorganized with digital files. A hoarder of downloads and old documents saved in a chaotic labyrinth of folders on his cloud drive. I was the architect, the one who brought order to chaos, both in our home and in the soaring glass and steel structures I designed for a living. It was a role I had accepted, even cherished. To build, to structure, to create a solid foundation. I was logged into his account, navigating the digital mess. A folder named Projects, then Personal, then a subfolder simply titled Misc. Typical Liam. Inside a jumble of files, vacation_ideas.docx, gift_list_22.3.pdf, end thin, something that made my breath catch, a video file for Clara.mov. Clara, my best friend since we were 5 years old, with scraped knees and shared secrets, the maid of honor at my wedding, the godmother to a child we had planned to have, the woman who held my hand when my mother died. But Clara, my heart began a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. It's nothing, I told myself. A video for her, maybe of her birthday party last year, or a silly clip he'd promised to edit. There were 1,000 innocent explanations, and I clung to them like a drowning woman to a piece of driftwood. But my hand, moving with a will of its own, trembled as I double-clicked the file. The video player opened. There was no sound at first, just a shaky image of a room I recognized instantly, the lilac walls of the guest bedroom in the little country inn where Clara had stayed a month ago when she was supposedly on a solo wellness retreat. She'd sent me pictures of the quaint furniture, the beautiful view from the window. "So peaceful here, Ellie," she'd texted. Just what I needed to clear my head. The camera panned, and then it settled. On the bed, on two figures, the image resolved. Sarah Paned, and the air left my lungs in a single, silent scream. It was them, Liam and Clara, my husband and my best friend. They were tangled together, log-hined, their faces slick with sweat and something that looked terrifyingly like joy. Liam's wedding ring, the simple gold band I had placed on his finger, glinted under the lamplight. He ran his hand through Clara's hair, the same way he ran it through mine, and leaned in to whisper something in her ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her response. I had known my entire life. The sound of it, imagined in the dead silence of my office, was the sound of a wrecking ball hitting a wall of glass. My world didn't just crack. It ceased to exist. In its place was a white-hot vacuum, a void where 32 years of my life had just been. My friendship with Clara, a structure I had believed was made of granite, was sand. My marriage to Liam, the home I had so carefully designed and built, was a hologram. I watched the entire 17 minutes. Every touch, every kiss, every shared glance was a fresh nail driven into my flesh. I watched until the screen went black, leaving only my own reflection staring back at me. A woman with a face of stone, her eyes wide with a horror so profound it had burned past tears. I didn't cry. Crying was for sadness, for grief. This was something else entirely. It was a demolition, an erasure. And in the rubble, a new and terrible clarity began to form. Architects are precise. We understand that for every action, there is a reaction. We understand that some structures are built on faulty foundations. And we know better than anyone that sometimes the only way to fix a problem is to tear the whole damned thing down to the studs. He had named the file for Clara, and in that moment a cold, calm thought bloomed in the center of the devastation. Okay, I thought, this will be for Clara. The shock didn't recede into pain or grief. It calcified. It hardened into something cold and heavy in my chest, like a block of frozen concrete. I sat in my office chair for what could have been minutes or hours, the black screen of the monitor reflecting the empty room around me. The house was silent. Liam was out at a client dinner, he'd said. I wondered if Clara was with him now, if they were laughing about their little video, their secret performance. The thought didn't bring tears. It brought a strange, chilling focus. I am an architect. I solve problems. I analyze weaknesses in a system and I design a solution. The problem was the lie. The weakness was their belief that they were safe, that I was a fool. The solution, 10, needed to be structural. It needed to be absolute. A simple confrontation was out of the question. What would that achieve? Tears. Danielle's pathetic excuses. Liam would lie. He was a fantastic liar. He'd call me crazy, jealous, tell me I was misinterpreting things. Clara would cry. She would play the victim. She would talk about a moment of weakness, a terrible mistake. They would try to manage the damage, to contain the narrative. They would make it my problem, my emotional outburst. No, that was their way, not mine. My way would be precise, and place it where it would do the most damage, where its impact could not be contained or denied or spun. Liam was a ship without an anchor, drifting on the tides of his own selfish whims. Hurting him was easy, but it was also unsatisfying. He would just drift somewhere else. Clara Thogi. Clara was different. Her life was a meticulously constructed facade. Her perfect job in PR, her handsome old money Mark, and most importantly, her family, the prestigious, image-obsessed Hamiltons, her father, a retired judge, who still wielded influence like a scepter, her mother, a woman who chaired 3 different charities, and whose social standing was her entire identity. To the Hamiltons, appearances weren't just important, they were everything. Their daughter, Tay Bountiful, successful PR maven, engaged to the right man, was a cornerstone of that identity. The foundation of Clara's life wasn't love or integrity. It was the approval of her family. And that's where I would place the dynamite. My fingers, steady now, moved across the keyboard. I opened a new email. I downloaded the video file from Liam's cloud, the progress bar, a slow green snake of poison. I saved it to my desktop, renaming it simply truth.mov. Then, I began my research. It wasn't difficult. Clara had bragged for years about her family's connections. I found her father's private email address on the website for a legal foundation he sponsored. Her mother's was on the contact page for a gala she was organizing. And Mark Hairswayet, unsuspecting his was on his company's executive bio page. 3 email addresses, 3 pillars of Clara's perfect world. I didn't write a long, emotional letter. An architect's blueprint is not emotional. It is a set of clear, concise instructions. My email was the same, to jamilton.esq@private.net. Jamilton, gala.org. mark.peterson@petersoninvest.com. Subject. Regarding Clara Theobavi. Of the email contained a single sentence. I believe this belongs to you. Below the text, one attached the file. Truth.mov. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my finger hovering over the mouse. There was no hesitation. There was no doubt. There was only the cold, clean certainty of a structural engineer condemning a building that was rotten to its core. I was not just ending a friendship or a marriage. I was performing a demolition. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that they would never be able to rebuild on this foundation again. I clicked send. The click was almost silent, a tiny plastic sound in the stillness of my office. But in my head, it was a thunderclap. A final, irrevocable sound. The sound of a world ending. My finger lingered on the mouse. The cursor hovering over the sent confirmation. Done. The message, with its venomous little attachment, was gone, rocketing through the digital ether to 3 separate inboxes, 3 separate lives that were about to intersect with a nightmare. My first instinct was to destroy my own technology, to hurl my laptop against the wall, to smash my phone with a hammer, an impulse to sever my connection to the chaos I had just unleashed. But that was an emotional response, a panic response. I was beyond that now. I was in the cold, clear space of consequence. Instead, I did something very deliberate. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was perfectly steady. I drank it slowly, feeling the cool liquid slide down my throat, a strange counterpoint to the fire in my chest. Then, I walked back to my office, picked up my phone, and powered it down. I did the same with my laptop. I unplugged the wireless router from the wall. Silence. A complete digital blackout of my own making. I was creating an airlock, a buffer zone between the act and the inevitable explosion. I knew it was coming. The frantic calls, the hysterical texts, the emails filled with rage and disbelief. It would be a tsunami of digital noise, and I needed to be on high ground when it hit. The house felt enormous, empty. Every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed unnaturally loud. Every creak of the floorboards was a footstep that wasn't there. I walked through the downstairs rooms, touching the things that had once been the artifacts of my life, the smooth marble of the kitchen island where Liam and I had breakfast every morning, the worn velvet of the armchair where Clara and I would drink wine and talk for hours. They weren't mine anymore. They were props from a play, and the final curtain had just come down. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie of my own life. I was the main character, yes, but I was also the audience waiting to see what would happen next. There was no regret. It was a shocking realization. I had just immolated my two most important relationships, and I didn't feel a shred of remorse. What I felt was finality, the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from completing a difficult, necessary task. I had found a rot in the foundations of my life, and I had exposed it to the light. What happened now was simply the inevitable collapse. I went upstairs to our bedroom. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I looked at the bed, neatly made, a place of supposed intimacy and trust. The images from the video, stark and ugly, superimposed themselves over the calm domestic scene. I saw them there on my sheets in my home. No, White. That wasn't right. The video was from the inn. Had they done it here too? In our bed, the question was a physical blow, and for the first time, a wave of nausea rolled through me. Of course they had. Of course they had. The sheer arrogance of it, the utter contempt. I turned away, unable to look at it anymore. I walked into my closet, a space that was mine alone, and I sat down on the floor, surrounded by my clothes, my shoes, the scent of my perfume. I drew my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them, and I waited. I was a seismologist who had just triggered a massive earthquake, and I was sitting in my silent little station, waiting for the needle on the Richter scale to start screaming. It was only a matter of time. The silence lasted for 2 hours and 14 minutes. I know because I watched the numbers on my digital watch change with a detached sort of fascination. 2 hours and 14 minutes of a fragile temporary peace. Then the dam broke. I had powered my phone back on, not out of a desire to communicate, but out of a clinical need to observe the results of my experiment. I set it on the kitchen island, screen up, and watched it come to life. It was a detonation. The lock screen lit up with a barrage of notifications, one cascading over the other so quickly I couldn't even read them. A flurry of missed calls and text previews. 14 missed calls. Clara 3 missed calls. Liam 1 missed call. Clara's MOM 28. New messages. The first text I opened was from Clara. It was a machine gun burst of panicked digital screaming. Ellie, pick up the phone. Pick up. Unknown. What did you do? What did you do? My mother called me. My father. You psycho. You crazy bitch. You've ruined my life. Answer may read the messages with a kind of numb appraisal. You've ruined my life. The irony was so bitter, it almost made me laugh. She hadn't ruined her own life by sleeping with my husband. No. I had ruined her life by showing her parents what she'd done. The logic of the unfaithful. It was breathtaking. Then came a text from Liam. His approach was different. Less panic, more confusion, and a wheedling attempt at control. Ellie, what's going on? Clara just called me screaming. Something about an email. Call me. We need to talk. We need to talk. The four most condescending words in the English language. A phrase used by people in power to command a subordinate to the principal's office. He still thought he was in control. He had no idea that I had rewritten the entire script. But the message that truly sent a chill down my spine was the one from Clara's mother, Catherine Hamilton. It was a single, perfectly composed sentence, but it carried the icy weight of a death threat. Eleanor, you will call me immediately. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. A command from a queen to a disobedient subject. I could almost hear her voice, clipped and dripping with venomous civility. The results were in. My experiment was a resounding success. I had hit the load-bearing walls. I had cracked the foundation. As I was reading Catherine's text, the phone began to vibrate violently on the countertop. Liam's face appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment, at the smiling picture of him from our trip to Italy 2 years ago. A ghost, a stranger. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called back immediately. I silenced the call. He called the third time. I declined it. A new text from him popped up. For God's sake, Ellie, pick up the phone. Whatever you think you know, you're blowing this way out of proportion. Blowing this out of proportion. The classic gasp anthem, the 17-minute video of him with my best friend was just me, being dramatic. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of it was what finally broke through my cold composure. A laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't a happy sound. It was harsh and ragged, the sound of something breaking inside me. I was still looking at his text when I heard the sound of a key in the front door. My heart hammered against my IBS. He was home. The client dinner had miraculously ended early. The time for silent observation was over. The confrontation I had sought to avoid by other means had just arrived on my doorstep. I squared my shoulders and took a deep breath. The air felt like ice. Let him come. I was ready. Liam walked into the kitchen, and for a second, everything was eerily normal. He loosened his tie, dropped his briefcase by the door, the same routine he followed every evening. He still wore the mask of the loving husband returning from a long day at work. It was a masterful performance. "Hey, you're home," he said, his voice casual. "I tried calling. Did you see what Clara sent? She's completely lost her mind." He was starting with a lie, a bold, audacious one. He was going to pretend he was on my side, the two of us against a hysterical Clara. He was testing the waters, trying to see what I knew, how much I knew. He thought he could manage this. I didn't answer. I just stood there, on the other side of the marble island, watching him. My silence was a wall he hadn't expected. His smile faltered. "Ellie." He took a step closer. "Are you okay? You look pale." "I'm fine, Liam." My voice was quiet, dangerously calm. It didn't sound like my own. "Well, something's wrong," he insisted, his brow furrowing in that fake concerned way of his. "Clara's having some kind of breakdown. Her mom called me too, yelling. What's going on?" I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I watched him squirm, watched the confidence drain from his face, replaced by a dawning flicker of fear. He knew, of course he knew. He just didn't know that I knew. "A video file, Liam," I said softly, "on your cloud drive, in a folder named MISC." The blood drained from his face. I watched it happen in real time. The healthy flush from his cheeks vanished, leaving behind a sickly gray pallor. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air. The file was called for Clara.mov. I continued, my voice level, almost conversational. I was looking for the receipt for the new CAD software. I thought it might be a video from her birthday. It wasn't. He finally found his voice, but it was a pathetic, strangled thing. "Ellie, I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, my eyebrows raised in mock curiosity. "Can you really? Can you explain the lilac wallpaper at the inn? Can you explain the 17 minutes of you and my best friend in a bed that wasn't ours? Please, Liam. I'm an architect. I appreciate a well-reasoned explanation." He flinched as if I'd struck him. "It wasn't what it looked like." I laughed. The sound was sharp and ugly in the pristine kitchen. "It wasn't what it looked like. That's the best you can do. Liam, I have a master's degree. You run a department of 30 people. And the best you have is the punchline from a bad sitcom. It was a mistake." He stammered, his eyes darting around the room, anywhere but at me. "A huge, stupid mistake. A mistake is taking the wrong turn on the highway, Liam," I said, my voice dropping lower, colder. "A mistake is buying the wrong kind of milk. What you did was a choice. A long series of choices. You chose to lie to me. You chose to sleep with her. You chose to film it. And you chose to save it. These were not mistakes. They were actions. And actions have consequences." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading terror. "What did you do, Ellie?" he whispered. "Clara said. She said you sent it to her parents." I gave him a small, tight smile. It felt alien on my face. The file was named for Clara. I simply facilitated the delivery. The full weight of it finally landed on him. He stumbled back a step, his hand reaching out for the counter to steady himself. The mask was gone. The confident husband, Tailier, the manipulator, all of it had burned away, leaving only a weak, pathetic man staring at the ruins of his life. You didn't," he breathed. "Oh God, Ellie, why? The word was a spark that ignited the cold block of concrete in my chest into a raging inferno. Why? You want to know why? Because you and she took the most important things in my life and you set them on fire for a cheap thrill. You stood in the ashes and you laughed. You thought I wouldn't notice the smoke. You didn't just betray me, Liam. Insulted my intelligence. You thought I was stupid. You thought I was weak." I took a step towards him, rounding the island. He flinched again. "I'm not weak," aside, my voice a low snarl. "I'm a builder, and I know exactly how to bring a faulty structure down. Now pack a bag. I want you out of my house." He just stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. "Ellie, please now." "Liam." My voice was steel. "Get out. or I swear to God I'll call the police and tell them there's a strange man in my home who refuses to leave. He saw it in my eyes then. The absolute, unshakable truth that the woman he married was gone, and the woman standing in her place would not hesitate. He turned defeated and walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs. I stood there, listening to the sounds of him opening drawers, a closet door sliding open, the sounds of a life being dismantled. The first part of the demolition was complete. The house without Liam was not empty, it was haunted. Every room held a memory, and every memory was now a crime scene. I walked through the living room, my hand trailing over the back of the sofa where he used to sit, his arm draped around my shoulders while we watched movies. I saw us there a happy couple, and then I saw the ghost of Clara, sitting on the other side of me, laughing at the screen, her hand casually brushing Liam's leg when she thought I wasn't looking. Had that happened, or was I inventing it now, my mind re-editing my entire life through the filter of their betrayal? I couldn't trust my own memories anymore. They were all contaminated evidence. That night I didn't sleep in my bedroom. The thought of lying in that bed was a physical violation. I took a spare blanket and pillow from the linen closet, and I lay down on the couch in my office. It was hard and uncomfortable, but it was a neutral space. It was the room where I created things, where I worked. It felt safe. In the quiet darkness, the flashbacks came. Not in a torrent. Boudin Swarp, painful fragments. Clara and me, Eggy 10, building a treehouse in her backyard. Her dad had given us the wood and the nails, and we had spent a whole summer hammering away, our hands clumsy, our plans ambitious. "We'll be neighbors forever, Ellie," she'd said, her face smudged with dirt. "We'll have a secret rope connecting our houses." A promise made with the fierce sincerity of a child. A promise she had apparently forgotten. Liam and I on our honeymoon in Greece. We were standing on a cliff in Santorini, the white buildings gleaming against the impossible blue of the Aegean Sea. He'd turned to me, his eyes full of a light I thought was love, and he'd said, "I can't believe how lucky I am to have found you." He'd held my face in his hands and kissed me, and in that moment I had felt like the most cherished woman in the world. What a fool I'd been, a gullible, romantic fool. The pain of these memories was different from the cold rage I had felt earlier. This was a deeper ache, a hollowing out. The rage was a shield, a weapon. This was the wound beneath it. The rage was for what they had done. The pain was for what I had lost. I had lost my husband. That was a simple, brutal fact, but losing Clara, that was like losing a limb. We had a shared history that spanned decades. We had a language made of inside jokes and shared glances. She knew me in a way Liam never had, never could. And she had taken that intimate knowledge, that truth, and she had used it to gut me. That was the part that kept replaying in my mind, not just the affair, but the calculation behind it. The times she must have been with him, then called me right after. The times she'd sat across from me, listening to me talk about my future with Liam, all while knowing she was sleeping with him. Every shared secret, every moment of vulnerability I had ever shown her, was now a weapon she had held against me. I finally drifted into a fitful sleep, and I dreamed of a house, a beautiful house I had designed with soaring ceilings and walls of glass. But as I walked through it, cracks began to appear in the walls. They spread like silent and fast. The glass began to splinter. The floor beneath my feet began to crumble. I was trying to hold it together with my bare hands, trying to patch the cracks, but it was hopeless. The entire structure was groaning, collapsing in on itself. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding, the dream sound of shattering glass still ringing in my ears. The house was dark and silent, but the dream was right. The collapse was already underway, and it was far from over. The call from Clara came the next afternoon. I had spent the morning in a fog, mechanically cleaning the house, throwing out every picture of me and Liam, me and Clara, the three of us together. I packed them all into a black trash bag, a funeral for a life that was dead. When my phone rang with her name on the screen, I almost didn't answer. But I knew I had to. This was another part of the demolition, a piece of wreckage I had to confront. I answered and said nothing. "Ellie," her voice was a cracked whisper. All the hysteria from the previous night was gone, replaced by a dead, hollow tone. I still said nothing. Can we meet?" she asked. "Please. I need to see you." "Why?" I asked, my voice flat. She hesitated. I need to explain. I've already heard the explanation from Liam," I said coldly. "It was a mistake. Is that what you're going to say, Clara? That your year-long affair with my husband was a typo? I heard her draw a sharp breath. It wasn't a year. Don't lie to me, I snapped, the coldness breaking for a moment. Don't you dare lie to me again. I'm an architect. I see the blueprints. I see the timeline, the little trips, the Latinigs, the wellness retreat. Don't insult me by pretending this was a one-time thing. Silence. Then, a choked sob. Okay, she whispered. Okay, you're right. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown. A neutral place, public enough to prevent a screaming match. I chose one halfway between my house and her office, a place we had never been to together. No ghosts. I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting at a small table in the corner, hunched over a cup she wasn't drinking. She looked wrecked. Her usually immaculate hair was a mess. Her clothes were rumpled, and there were dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't hide. She looked like a stranger, a sad, broken stranger. I felt a flicker of something in my chest. Pity? No, it wasn't pity. It was a grim sense of accuracy. This was the correct outcome. This was the consequence. I walked to her table and sat down without a word. She looked up, and her eyes were red and swollen. Ellie, she began, her voice trembling. I am so sorry. No, you're not, I said calmly. You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry I sent that video to your mother and father, and to Mark. That's what you're sorry for. That's not true, she said, tears welling in her eyes again. I hate myself for what I did. I hate that I hurt you. Did you hate it last month at the inn? I asked, my voice low and sharp. Did you hate it when you were laughing with him? Did you hate it when you came over for dinner the next week and asked me how my work was going? She flinched, recoiling as if I'd slapped her. That's not fair. Fair. I leaned forward, my hands flat on the table. You want to talk about fair. Fair was me trusting you with every secret I had. Fair was me believing our friendship was the one unshakable thing in my life. Fair was me thinking my husband loved me. You and he burned the concept of fair to the ground. So don't you ever talk to me about what's fair again. Tears were streaming down her face now. I don't know why it happened. It just started. Liam, he was unhappy. Oh, here we go, I said, leaning back in my chair. The blame shift. A classic maneuver. Liam was unhappy. So instead of talking to his wife, or leaving me, or going to therapy, the only logical solution was to sleep with my best friend. Is that the story we're telling today? It wasn't like that, she insisted weakly. He felt neglected. You were always working, so focused on your career, and there it was, the knife she'd been hiding. My ambition, my work, the very thing I was proud of, was now the justification for their affair. So this is my fault, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, because I worked hard, because I was building a life for us. That's why you felt it was your duty to, what? Console my poor neglected husband. You are pathetic, Clara, truly, deeply pathetic. What you did was cruel, Ellie, she whispered, her voice shaking with a new emotion, anger. You didn't have to destroy my life. My father, Mark. Hey, she choked on the name. He's gone. He moved out. My parents, they won't even speak to me. They look at me like I'm garbage. I stared at her, my face a mask of stone. Good, I said. Now you know how it feels to have the people you trust most in the world look at you and see something worthless. I stood up. The conversation was over. There was nothing left to say. I thought we were sisters, Ellie, she said, her voice pleading. I looked down at her, at the woman who had been the other half of my soul for 30 years, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty wasteland where my love for her used to be. Sisters don't do this to each other, Clara, I said. We were never sisters. We were just strangers who knew each other's secrets. And now, we're not even that. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. The bell on the door chimed behind me, a tiny, cheerful sound that marked the end of a lifetime. The days that followed were a blur of ugly logistics and social shrapnel. Friends, once mutual, were now forced to choose a side. The phone calls were tentative at first, full of awkward pauses and careful questions. Hey, just checking in. Heard there was ... some trouble. Most of them were Clara's friends, first people I had inherited through our friendship. Their loyalty, unsurprisingly, defaulted to her, or rather, to a carefully curated version of the story she was now spinning. A story of a lonely woman, a predatory man, a moment of weakness, and a cruel, vengeful wife who had gone nuclear. I became the villain in her redemption arc. I heard whispers of it from the few people who remained in my corner. My friend Sarah, who had known me since college, called me in a fury. "You won't believe what Jessica is telling people," she'd fumed over the phone. "She's saying Liam pursued Clara for months, that he was emotionally abusive to you, and that Clara was just trying to protect you, and that your response was a sign of your own instability." I told her she was out of her mind. "It doesn't matter, Sarah," aside, my voice weary. The lies didn't even have the power to hurt me anymore. They were just noise. "Of course it matters," she insisted. "She's slandering you." But she was wrong. It didn't matter. These people, this social circle, it was all part of the old structure. The house that had been condemned. What did I care if scavengers were picking through the wreckage? Let them have it. The isolation was profound. It was like a thick fog had rolled in, cutting me off from the rest of the world. My house, once a place of comfort and shared life, was now a silent fortress. I worked from home, burying myself in blueprints and structural calculations. The clean lines and predictable physics of my job were a comfort. In my work, if a foundation was sound, the building would stand. There were rules, there was order. Then an email appeared in my inbox that was not a work order or a message from a contractor. The subject line was simple: "Hello, Eleanor." The sender was Mark.Peterson at petersoninvest.com. Clara's fiance, or ex-fiance. My finger hovered over the delete button. What could he possibly have to say to me? Was he going to curse me out, call me a homewrecker, blame me for blowing up his future? I wouldn't have blamed him. In my quest for revenge on Clara, he had been acceptable collateral damage, a means to an end. I had never once stopped to consider the man himself. Curiosity, or perhaps a flicker of guilt, made me open it. The message was short. "Eleanor, I imagine this is the last email you would expect to receive. I am not writing to you with anger or accusations. I am simply another person who has been recently disabused of a certain reality. I find myself in a city that no longer feels like home, surrounded by people who don't know what to say. I suspect you may be in a similar position. I'm not sure why I'm writing this, but if you would be willing, I would like to buy you a cup of coffee. No agenda. Just a conversation. Mark. I read the email 3 times. It was quiet and utterly devoid of the drama that had consumed my life for the past week. Disabused of a certain reality. Yes, that was exactly it. He wasn't blaming me, he wasn't yelling, he was reaching out. A survivor from the same shipwreck, signaling from a different lifeboat. I thought about ignoring it. My instinct was to retreat, to pull the walls of my fortress up even higher. Interacting with him felt dangerous, complicated. He was a living piece of the wreckage, a reminder of everything that had happened, but I was also so terribly, crushingly alone. The silence in my house was becoming a physical weight. He was the only other person on the planet who understood the precise nature of the lies we had been told. He had seen the video. He knew the unvarnished truth. I took a deep breath and typed a reply. "Mark, yes. A conversation sounds welcome. Let me know when and where. Ellie. I hit send before I could change my mind. I had no idea what I was walking into, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a flicker of something other than rage or grief. I felt curiosity. The meeting with Mark was the strangest kind of blind date. We met at a quiet cafe that felt like it belonged in a different city, one of those places with reclaimed wood tables and serious baristas. It smelled of dark roast coffee and a kind of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. I recognized him from the photos Clara had plastered all over her social media. He was taller than I expected, with a kind of understated, preppy handsomeness that looked better in person than it did online. He had kind eyes, but they were shadowed with a deep, weary sadness that I recognized instantly. It was the same sadness I saw in my own reflection. He stood up when I approached his table, a small, old-fashioned gesture of courtesy that felt surprisingly comforting. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you for coming." "Ellie," I corrected him automatically. "And thank you for the invitation." The first few minutes were stilted and awkward. We ordered coffee. We talked about the weather. We were two strangers bound together by a shared trauma, circling each other cautiously. Finally, he broke the ice. "I should probably start by saying, I'm not angry at you," he said, looking directly at me. His gaze was unnervingly direct. "What you did was brutal, but I can't find it in myself to blame you for it. I'm more angry that the situation existed in the first place. I felt a knot of tension I didn't even know I was holding begin to unwind in my chest. I didn't think about you, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper, when I sent it. You were just an email address, a tool to get to her. I am sorry for that, for the way you had to find out. He gave a small, humorless smile. Don't be. Would you have preferred I found out a year after the wedding? 5 years, after we had children, you gave me the truth. It was a gift. Even if it was wepied in verbadwiri. He paused, stirring his coffee. I've been going over it in my head. The timeline. Every little lie she told me. I'm having dinner with my parents. I'm staying late at work. I need a weekend away with my girlfriends. Were you one of those girlfriends? Sometimes, I said the word tasting like poison. She used me as an alibi more than once. She'd tell me she was having a girls' night with someone else, and tell you she was with me. He shook his head slowly, a look of grim understanding on his face. The architecture of it all, he murmured. It's impressive in a sickening way. The sheer level of planning. I'm an architect, I said. I know a complex structure when I see one. This one was intricate. We talked for almost 2 hours. We didn't talk about feelings or heartbreak. We talked like two investigators comparing notes. We laid out the timeline of their deception, piece by painful piece. His story of her emotional distance, her Sudan trips, her secretive phone calls. It was a sordid, ugly puzzle, and as we put the pieces together, a clear picture emerged. Not one of a spontaneous mistake, but of a calculated, long-term campaign of deceit. He told me about the confrontation with Clara, how she had cried and denied, and then, finally, when he showed her my email, she had collapsed into a puddle of self-pity. She never once said she was sorry for hurting me, Mark said, his voice flat. She only said she was sorry her life was ruined. That's what she said to me, too, I replied. In that moment, sitting across from this handsome, wounded stranger, I felt a profound sense of validation. I wasn't the crazy, vengeful monster Clara was painting me as. I was a rational actor who had been pushed to an extreme. Mark's calm, quiet corroboration was a balm on a raw wound. He saw the truth because he had lived the other half of it. What do you do now? I asked him. He sighed, looking out the window. I don't know. My whole life was here. My job, my apartment, my future. It was all tied up with her family. I feel like a tourist in my own city now. He turned back to me. What about you? I'm staying in the house for now, I said, but I'm going to sell it. I can't live in a crime scene. After that, I don't know. I have my work. I'll focus on that. I'll build something new. He nodded, a flicker of a genuine smile in his eyes. Spoken like a true architect. As we stood to leave, there was another awkward pause. What was the protocol for this? A handshake, a hug. We were allies, not friends, survivors, not companions. He simply nodded. Thank you for this, Ellie, he said. It helped. Yes, I agreed. It did. I walked away from that cafe feeling lighter, not happy, not healed, but understood. My act of revenge had been a solitary one, born of isolation and fury, but in its aftermath I had found an unexpected, quiet moment of solidarity. I wasn't entirely alone in the wreckage. Someone else had seen the blueprint of the lie and had confirmed my calculations. The building was condemned, and it was the right call. The brief respite I felt after meeting with Mark evaporated when the first lawyer's letter arrived. It came via courier, a thick, cream-colored envelope with the embossed letterhead of a prestigious downtown law firm, the kind of firm that didn't come cheap, the kind of firm Judge Hamilton would have on retainer. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The language was cold, formal, and utterly menacing. It was a cease and desist letter, filled with legal jargon about defamation, invasion of privacy, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It accused me of a malicious and targeted campaign of harassment against Clara Hamilton. It demanded I destroy all copies of the illicitly obtained private material, and sign a non-disclosure agreement that would effectively gag me for life. And it ended with a thinly veiled threat. If I did not comply within 48 hours, they would pursue all available legal remedies to the fullest extent of the law. The Hamiltons were fighting back, not with emotional phone calls, but with the full weight of their money and influence. They were trying to bury me in paperwork, to intimidate me into silence. They were trying to rewrite the narrative again, to paint me not just as a vengeful ex-wife, but as a criminal. My first reaction was fear, a cold knot of it in my stomach. I was an architect. I built things. I didn't know how to navigate this world of lawsuits and legal threats. They were trying to drag me onto their home turf, a battlefield where they made the rules. I sat with the letter for an hour, reading it over and over, the dense, legal phrases blurring together. They were counting on me to be scared. They were counting on me to be overwhelmed. They expected me to panic, to call them, to agree to their terms, just to make it all go away. But as the initial fear subsided, it was replaced by something else. That familiar, cold rage began to smolder in my chest again. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost artistic. They were accusing me of the very thing they had done to me, but on a scale I couldn't have imagined. And they called the video private material. Private, as if the act of my husband cheating with my best friend was a sacred confidence I was expected to honor. No, I would not be intimidated. I would not be silenced. The next morning, I didn't call their lawyer. I called my own. I found a divorce attorney named Helen Croft. She was a woman in her 50s with a reputation for being a shark. Her website's tagline was Strategic Solutions for Difficult Transitions. It sounded like something I would write. I sat in her sleek, minimalist office, the menacing letter on the table between us. She read it slowly, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she took off her glasses and looked at me. "Well," Say sighed, her voice dry, "they're certainly not messing around." "Can they do this?" I asked, my voice tight. "Can they sue me?" "They can try," Helen said. "In this country you can sue a ham sandwich if you're willing to pay the filing fees. The question is, can they win? Defamation? Unlikely. Truth is an absolute defense. Invasion of privacy? More complicated. The video was on your husband's cloud drive, which you had access to. It's marital property. Arguably, it gets messy. But their goal here isn't to win in court. What is it then? Their goal is to bleed you dry," she said bluntly. "To bury you in legal fees, motions, depositions, to make your life so miserable that you sign whatever they put in front of you just to make it stop. They're betting that you don't have the resources or the stomach to fight them." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp and intelligent. "So the real question, Eleanor, is not what they can do. It's what you are prepared to do. Do you have the stomach for this fight?" I thought about Liam's pathetic excuses. I thought about Clara's tearful manipulations. I thought about the Hamiltons and their arrogant, threatening letter. They all had one thing in common. They all underestimated me. They all thought I would break. I looked Helen straight in the eye. "I designed and oversaw the construction of the new Trigon Tower. It has a floating foundation and a triple-damped counterweight system to withstand a Category 5 hurricane and a 7.0 earthquake. I don't break easily." I pushed the letter back across the table towards her. "Tell them to go to hell." A slow smile spread across Helen Croft's face. "Good," she said. "Now we're getting somewhere. Let's start building your fortress." The letter from Clara's family was a declaration of war, and I was not going to be a passive defender. Helen's words had sparked something in me. "Let's start building your fortress." It was language I understood. It was a project, and I would approach it with the same meticulous precision I brought to every blueprint. My first move was to protect myself. Helen advised me to change all my passwords, to secure every account, to assume that they might try to dig into my life with the same ruthlessness I had shown them. I spent an entire day creating new, complex passwords, enabling authentication on everything, and reviewing my own digital footprint with a critical eye. But a fortress isn't just about high walls. It's about having your own artillery. They had accused me of obtaining the video illicitly. So I started to build a file, my own file. I was an architect of information. I went through years of my own emails, my own text messages, my own photos. I was looking for evidence of the lie, for the small cracks in the facade that I had missed at the time, and I found them. Oh God, did I find them. An email from Liam from 6 months ago saying he was stuck on a business trip in Chicago an extra night due to a sudden blizzard. I checked the historical weather data. It had been clear and 50 degrees in Chicago that day, but it had been snowing in Vermont, near the ski resort where Clara had been on a solo trip. A text from Clara, a selfie of her, in a bar, supposedly with her cousin. "Wish you were here." She'd written, but in the reflection, in the mirror behind her, I could just make out the shoulder of a man's jacket, a gray tweed jacket with a leather elbow patch, the same jacket Liam had worn to Thanksgiving dinner last year, receipts, credit card statements from our joint account, a charge for 2 tickets to a concert I had never attended. a restaurant bill from a city he was never supposed to have been in. Each one was a small betrayal, a tiny piece of the mosaic of their deceit. At the time, I had trusted him completely. I had never thought to question him. Now his lies were so obvious they were almost comical. I compiled everything into a single password-protected folder on a new encrypted hard drive. I labeled it insurance. It was a catalog of their contempt for me, a detailed blueprint of their affair. It was ugly and it was painful to assemble, but it was also empowering. They wanted to fight me with lawyers and threats. Fine. I would fight them with the one thing they couldn't spin or deny: the truth, all of it. Helen was impressed. She called my file a masterpiece of marital forensics. She drafted a response to the Hamiltons' lawyer that was a work of art in its own right. It was polite, professional, and utterly dismissive. It stated that I considered their claims to be without merit. It asserted my right to my own property, including digital assets shared within the marriage, and it ended with a sentence that was pure. Distilled Helen Croft. Should your clients choose to pursue this frivolous and vexatious litigation, please be advised that Ms. Vance is fully prepared to enter into the discovery process and will be requesting all electronic communications, travel records, and financial statements from both Mr. Liam Vance and Miss Clara Hamilton for the preceding 24 months. It was a perfectly aimed shot across their bow. A warning: you want to open this door. You want to put Clara on a witness stand and have her lie under oath. Be my guest, because I have the receipts, all of them. We sent the letter, and then we waited. The 48-hour deadline they had given me came and went. There was no lawsuit, no further communication, just a deep ringing silence. I had called their bluff. They had come at me with power and intimidation, and I had met them with cold hard facts. I had built my fortress, and for now, it was holding. The war wasn't over, I knew that, but I had won the first major battle. And I had done it by being exactly what they had underestimated: a meticulous, petty, and utterly ruthless builder. There is a particular kind of silence that follows a battle. It's not peace, it's a heavy, watchful quiet, the air thick with the unspoken threat of the next engagement. After Helen sent our response, that was the silence that descended on my life. The Hamiltons had retreated, but I knew they hadn't surrendered. They were regrouping, planning their next move. In this quiet, the rage that had been my fuel for weeks began to burn lower, and in its place a profound and crushing loneliness seeped in. The house was my fortress, but it was also my prison. The silence was deafening. I found myself leaving the television on in empty rooms, just for the noise. I would have long one-sided conversations with my cat, a fat, indifferent tabby named Gus. He was a terrible conversationalist, but he was a warm presence in the echoing emptiness of the house. One evening, I made the mistake of opening a bottle of wine. I had been avoiding alcohol, afraid of what emotions it might unleash, but the silence was just too loud that night. I poured a glass of deep red Cabernet, Te Wine Wayhead Cerved, et Ora Wed Dieng, and I sat on the floor of the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of my former life. The first glass just numbed the edges. The second glass brought the tears. The third glass brought the abyss. I pulled out my phone, my fingers clumsy, and I started scrolling through old photos. It was a form of self-torture, a deep dive into the museum of what I thought was a picture of me, Liam, and Clara, all squeezed into a photo booth at a summer fair 5 years ago. We were all laughing, our faces pressed together, goofy and young and full of a future that had seemed so bright and certain. Liam's arm was around my shoulder, but his other hand was just out of frame, near Clara's waist. Was he touching her then? Was the lie already alive in that cramped little booth? A picture of Clara and me on a beach, our arms around each other, smiling at the camera. I remembered that day. I had just gotten the promotion to lead architect on the Trigon project. I had been so excited, so full of pride. Clara had been my biggest cheerleader. "You're a rock star, Ellie," she'd said. "You're going to build the whole damn city." Had she been sleeping with my husband then? Was she cheering for me with one hand while stabbing me in the back with the other? The wine and the grief and the rage all mixed together into a toxic cocktail of despair. I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to smash everything, to take a sledgehammer to the beautiful, stupid house I had created, to shatter the windows, to kick holes in the walls, to burn it all to the ground. But I didn't. The architect, in me, Babe Boulder, was too deeply ingrained. I couldn't bring myself to destroy something so structurally sound, even if its contents were rotten. Instead, I just sat on the floor and sobbed. A raw, ugly, gut-wrenching cry that came from the deepest part of my soul. I cried for the woman I had been, the naive, trusting woman who had believed in love and friendship. I cried for the life I had so carefully designed, a life that had turned out to be a blueprint for a disaster. I cried because I had won the battle, but I was so utterly, devastatingly alone in the victory. Was it worth it? The question echoed in the empty room. Was this cold, silent fortress worth the price I had paid? The revenge had been satisfying in its execution, a perfect, clean strike. But the aftermath was this: me, drunk, and weeping on the floor of an empty house, with no one to call, no one to hold me. Just a fat cat who blinked at me with mild annoyance before going back to sleep. I didn't have an answer. I just knew that the demolition was complete, and I was left standing in the rubble. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I had the strength to rebuild. After my night of wine-soaked despair, I pulled myself together with a grim sort of determination. I had allowed myself one night to fall apart. Now, it was time to get back to work, both on my blueprints and on the tedious task of dismantling my marriage. Liam, it turned out, had his own strategy. And it was just as pathetic as I would have expected. He started with texts, long, rambling messages sent in the middle of the night. They were a cocktail of nostalgia, blimey, and feigned remorse. Remember that trip to the coast, the little inn with the fireplace? We were so happy then. I know I messed up. I was lost. She took advantage of my confusion. I miss you, Elle. I miss our life. He was trying to weave a new narrative, one where he was the tragic hero, a good man led astray by a cunning seductress. He was trying to cast Clara as the villain, and me as the understanding, forgiving wife who would eventually welcome him home. It was a fantasy, and a deeply insulting one. I ignored the texts, so he escalated to emails, longer, more elaborate versions of the same story. He wrote about how my work had consumed me, how he had felt lonely and adrift. He never used the word fault, but the implication was clear. I had created the vacuum that Clara had filled. I saved every email to my insurance file and sent them to Helen without comment. Her only reply was a single sentence: "The man is a fool, but he's a predictable one." Finally, when his digital barrage failed to get a response, he showed up. I was heading out to my car one morning when his rental pulled up to the curb. He got out, looking tired and rumpled. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes. For a fleeting moment he looked like a man in pain, but then he opened his mouth, and any flicker of sympathy I might have felt vanished. "Ellie, we need to talk," he said, walking towards me. "No, Liam, we don't," I said, not breaking my stride. "Anything you have to say can go through my lawyer. Anything I have to say to you will be in a deposition." He hurried to catch up with me, blocking my path to the car door. "Please, just 5 minutes. Don't do this, Elle. Don't throw everything away for one mistake." One mistake. I stopped and turned to face him, my voice dangerously low. "Let's be precise, Liam. Was it one mistake, or was it the 53 times you lied about where you were? Was it the thousands of dollars you spent on her from our joint account? Or was it the 17-minute video you made? You need to be more specific about which one mistake you're referring to." He paled, his confidence faltering in the face of my cold, hard facts. "She manipulated me," he said, his voice cracking. "She told me you were thinking of leaving me, that you didn't love me anymore. She twisted everything." I stared at him. The audacity of it was almost impressive. He was throwing Clara under the bus, not just to save himself, but to try and reposition himself as my protector, my fellow victim. "So let me get this straight," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "My best friend, a woman I have known my entire life, told you a lie about me, and instead of coming to me, your wife, to ask if it was true, you decided the most logical course of action was to begin a year-long affair with her. Is that the story you're going with? Because it's going to sound fantastic in court." He deflated completely. The lies were all he had, and they were useless against me. I saw a flicker of the old Liam then, the charming, manipulative man who could talk his way out of anything. He tried one last time. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper. "I never loved her, Ellie. It was always you. It was just meaningless. It meant nothing." I looked into his eyes, the eyes of the man I had promised to love forever, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, just a profound and final emptiness. It wasn't meaningless, Liam, I said quietly. It meant the end of us. It meant you're a liar and a cheat. It meant she's a traitor. It meant everything I thought was real was a fraud. That's not nothing. That is everything. I stepped around him, opened my car door, and got in. I didn't look at him as I started the engine and pulled away from the curb. I saw his reflection in my rearview mirror, a pathetic, shrinking figure standing alone on the street. He had tried to sell me one last blueprint for a life together, but I had seen the structural flaws, and I wasn't buying it. Life settled into a strange new rhythm. The rhythm of waiting. Waiting for the lawyers to hash out the details of the divorce. Waiting for the next move from the Hamiltons. Waiting for the house to sell. I had put the house on the market with a kind of grim efficiency. I hired an agent, signed papers, and emotionally detached myself from the process. The open houses were a surreal experience. I would leave for the day and return to find small signs of strangers having walked through my life. A misplaced cushion, a closet door left slightly ajar, the faint scent of someone else's perfume. It was a constant reminder that this was no longer my home. It was just a property, an asset to be liquidated. In the midst of this emotional and logistical limbo, I got a piece of news that I wasn't expecting. It came from Sarah, my one remaining friend from the old life who was still plugged into the gossip mill. We were having coffee, and she was giving me the latest updates on who was saying what. I mostly tuned it out, but then she said something that caught my attention. "You heard about Clara, right?" she asked, her tone cautious. "I try not to," I said flatly. "What now? Has she decided the affair was actually a performance art piece about the fragility of trust?" Sarah didn't smile. "No, she lost her job." I looked up from my coffee. "What?" "Apparently her father has some business dealings with the CEO of her company, or had, after all this came out. There was a disagreement, a falling out, and suddenly, Clara's position was eliminated. Corporate restructuring, they called it, but everyone knows what it was." I processed this information slowly. Clara lived for her career in PR. It was her identity, the glamorous job, the expense account, the parties. It was all part of the facade, and now it was gone. "And that's not all," Sarah continued, leaning forward. "Jessica told me that her parents have basically cut her off. They're still paying her rent, but that's it. They took her off their credit cards. They're making her life difficult. Apparently, the shame she brought on the family was unforgivable." I should have felt a surge of triumph, a sense of righteous victory. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? I hadn't just exposed her. I had set in motion a chain of events that had dismantled the life she cared about. My revenge hadn't just been a single explosion. It had been a slow-acting poison. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. I imagined Clara alone in her expensive apartment that she could no longer afford, without her job, without her fiancé. And now, without the financial and emotional support of the family, whose approval she had craved her entire life, she had been stripped of everything. She was ruined, utterly and completely. Did I feel guilty? No. Guilt implies that I did something wrong. I had simply told the truth. The consequences were of her own making. Did I feel pity? Maybe a little. A detached, clinical kind of pity for a creature that had been so thoroughly destroyed. The kind of pity you might feel for a predator caught in a trap it had been too arrogant to see. But mostly, what I felt was a deep and unsettling wariness. This whole ugly saga had been so destructive. It had laid waste to so many lives, including my own. There were no winners here. There were just different degrees of losers. Clara had lost her career and her family's respect. Liam had lost his wife and his comfortable life. Mark had lost his future. And I had lost the two people I loved most in the world, and in the process had become a person I barely recognized, a cold, calculating woman who could hear about the complete ruin of her former best friend and feel nothing more than a faint, weary ache. I had wanted to burn their world down. I had succeeded, but standing in the ashes, I was starting to realize that I was covered in soot myself, and I wasn't sure if I would ever be able to wash it all off. A few weeks later, just as I was beginning to think I might never hear from him again, I received another email from Mark. It was shorter than the first one. "Ellie, I'm leaving the city, moving back west to be closer to my family for a while. A change of scenery feels necessary. I wanted to thank you again for the conversation. It helped me put some things in perspective. I hope you find a way to build something new and strong. All the best, Mark. The email was a small, quiet punctuation mark at the end of a chaotic chapter. Our strange alliance, born of a shared betrayal, was over. He was moving on, physically and emotionally. He was getting out of the wreckage. I felt a pang of something that felt like envy. He had a place to go, a family to retreat to. My family consisted of a father in a retirement home in Florida, and a sister I spoke to twice a year. My home had been here with Liam and Clara. I had no west to run to. I had to stay here and sift through the rubble. I wrote back a simple reply. I'm glad you're getting a fresh start, Mark. I wish you all the best. To be well. It felt inadequate, but it was all I had. We were not friends. We were two people who had briefly stood together in the eye of a hurricane. Now, the storm was moving on, and so was he. His departure marked a turning point for me. It made me realize that I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I couldn't keep living in a house that was no longer a home, waiting for a divorce to be finalized. I needed to make a move. I needed my own change of scenery, even if it was just a change of address. The house had an offer on it, a good one. I accepted it without hesitation. The closing was in 30 days. Suddenly, I had a deadline, a ticking clock that forced me to be proactive. I spent the next few weeks in a frenzy of packing. It was a brutal process. Every object I touched was a memory. The set of dishes we got for our wedding, the bookshelf Liam built, the stupid, ugly lamp Clara had bought us as a housewarming gift. I was ruthless. I divided my life into 3 categories: keep, donate, and trash. The trash pile was enormous. It contained every gift from Liam, every photograph of us, every memento from a life that was now a lie. It was a painful, liberating purge, a baptism by dumpster. In the back of my closet, I found a box I hadn't opened in years. It was full of old letters and souvenirs from my friendship with Clara, notes we passed in high school, postcards from her semester abroad, the dried corsage from our senior prom, a thick, heavy history of 2 girls who had promised to be friends forever. I held the box in my hands for a long time. A part of me wanted to burn it, to eradicate every last trace of her from my life, but I didn't. Instead, I sealed the box with packing tape, and I wrote on it with a black marker, Pandora. I put it in the corner of the pile labeled Keep. I didn't know why. Maybe it was because you can't erase your history, no matter how much you might want to. Maybe it was because I needed to keep a record of the crime. Or maybe, just maybe, it was because a small, foolish part of me hoped that one day, many years from now, I might be able to look at it and feel something other than white-hot rage or hollow emptiness. I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't throw it away. Not yet. On the last day before the closing, as I stood in the empty house, the only thing left to do was to prepare for the final battle. Helen had called me that morning. Liam and his lawyer were refusing to sign the final divorce settlement, and the Hamiltons' lawyer had been in touch. They wanted a meeting, all of us, in one room. A final 4-way showdown to settle all the scores. It's a power play, Helen had warned. They want to get you in a room and intimidate you into signing a less favorable deal. They think they can break you. Let them try, I had said, my voice steady. Standing in the echoing emptiness of the house I had once loved, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had survived the discovery, Hey Ravenga, the isolation, and the legal threats. I had purged my life of the past. I was no longer the woman they had known. I was no longer the weeping victim or the raging fury. I was something new, something harder, something that had been tested by fire and had not melted. The meeting was set for the next day. Let them come. I was ready to close this final chapter. I was ready to finish the demolition. The law office where the meeting was held was designed to intimidate. Dark wood paneling, thick carpets that swallowed sound, and a massive mahogany table that felt more like an altar for a sacrifice than a place for negotiation. The air was stale with the smell of old paper and quiet money. I arrived with Helen 10 minutes early. I wore a black dress that was simple, severe, and professional. My hair was pulled back in a tight, clean bun. My face was a neutral mask. I was an architect coming to a final site inspection. They arrived together, Liam, Clara, and her parents, Judge Hamilton, and his wife Catherine, a united front of misery and resentment. They were flanked by their own lawyer, a slick-looking man named Davies who had the predatory smile of a shark. Liam wouldn't look at me. He stared at a fixed point on the wall behind my head, his face pale and drawn. Clara looked like a ghost. She was thin, her eyes were hollow, and she seemed to shrink into her chair as if trying to disappear. The Hamiltons, however, were radiating hostility. The judge, a man with a shock of white hair and a perpetually stern expression, looked at me as if I were a piece of filth he had found on his shoe. Catherine, dressed in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than my car, gave me a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. Helen began the meeting with cool professionalism, outlining the terms of our proposed settlement. It was a standard 50-50 split of the marital assets, including the proceeds from the sale of the house. It was fair. It was standard. Davies, the shark, let her finish. Then he leaned forward, his smile widening. "That proposal is unacceptable," he said smoothly. "Given Ms. Vance's actions, we believe a significant portion of the marital assets should be allocated to my client, Mr. Vance, as compensation for the damage to his professional reputation." I almost laughed. His reputation? Helen didn't even blink. "On what grounds?" she asked, her voice calm. "On the grounds that Ms. Vance's malicious distribution of private material has created a hostile environment for Mr. Vance in his workplace and community," Davies said. This was their strategy: to paint me as the aggressor, the saboteur, to punish me financially for exposing their lies. But before Helen could respond, Catherine Hamilton spoke up, her voice like splintering ice. "Let's stop playing these games," she said, her venomous gaze fixed on me. "We all know what this is about. This person has a vendetta against our family. She maliciously targeted our daughter, destroyed her engagement, and cost her her career. She is a vindictive, unstable woman, and we are not going to allow her to profit from her campaign of terror." My campaign of terror. I spoke for the first time, my voice quiet but carrying across the table. "Was that before or after your daughter started sleeping with my husband? I'm just trying to get the timeline straight." The judge slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed in the silent room. "You will show respect," he boomed, his face turning a blotchy red. "You have no idea the damage you have caused." "Oh, I think I do," I said, my eyes meeting his without flinching. "I have a very clear idea. And I don't regret a second of it." That's when all hell broke loose. Liam started stammering about how it was all a misunderstanding. Clara started to cry silently. Catherine Hamilton was calling me a sociopath. Davies was trying to regain control. I just sat there watching the chaos I had created. This was what they wanted: an emotional, ugly fight where they could overpower me, shout me down, make me the hysterical woman. But I wasn't going to play their game. I waited for a lull in the shouting. Then, I placed my hands flat on the table. The gesture was small, but it drew everyone's attention. "Enough," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the noise like a scalpel. The room fell silent. I looked at each of them in turn. "First, Liam, you are a coward and a liar. Liam, you will sign the papers as they are written, or I will see you in court, and I will enjoy every second of the discovery process. Then, Clara, you made your choice. Live with it." Finally, I turned my gaze to the Hamiltons. "And you," I said, my voice dropping to an icy calm, "you came here to threaten me, to intimidate me into silence. You think your money and your name can make this go away. But you've forgotten one thing." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single, slim flash drive. I placed it on the table between us. It was a copy of my insurance file. "That video," I said softly, "that was just the beginning. I have emails, I have receipts, I have a complete, documented timeline of their affair, full of your daughter's lies and my husband's deceit. It is a masterpiece of deception. And I have it saved in multiple locations, one of which is a sealed package with a lawyer who is not present in this room, with instructions to release it to every major news outlet in this city if I am ever threatened, harassed, or sued by any person in this room ever again." The air in the room went from tense to ice cold. I could see the calculation in the judge's eyes, the horror on Catherine's face, the utter defeat in Liam and Clara's. "This is not a negotiation," I said, my voice final and absolute. "This is the end. You will sign the papers. You will stay out of my life. You will never contact me again. And, in return, I will give you my silence." I stood up, my chair making a quiet, scraping sound on the floor. Helen stood with me. "Consider your options," I said. "You have 24 hours. And with that, I turned my back on all of them. I walked out of that room, out of that building, and into the bright, clean afternoon air. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The demolition was complete. The ground was finally clear. 6 months later, I was standing on a muddy patch of land on the outskirts of the city. The air smelled of damp earth and new construction. In front of me, a team of workers was pouring the concrete foundation for a new community library. My design. The divorce had been finalized a week after that meeting. They signed the papers without a single change. The house was sold. I had moved into a new apartment downtown, a place with clean lines, big windows, and no ghosts. It was small and it was mine. I hadn't heard a word from any of them. It was as if they had been erased from the earth. Sometimes I would feel a phantom limb ache, a memory of my friendship with Clara, or a fleeting thought of a life with Liam, but it was fading. The past was becoming a story I had read about someone else. I looked down at the blueprints, in my hand, the neat, black lines on the crisp white paper, a plan for a new structure, a place of quiet and learning and community, a place built on a solid foundation. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Sarah. "Drinks tonight." I smiled and typed back, "Absolutely." My life was not empty. It was just edited. I was building a new structure, with new people, on new ground. A cool breeze blew across the site, rustling the pages of the blueprint. I thought back to that moment, the click of the mouse that had detonated my entire world. I thought about the rage, the loneliness, and the cold, hard person I had become in order to survive. Did I regret it? It was the wrong question. Regret was for mistakes. What I had done was not a mistake. It was a reaction. It was the only possible response to a catastrophic structural failure. My only regret was that the betrayal had happened in the first place, that the demolition had been necessary. I looked up at the sky, a vast expanse of pale blue. It felt like a blank page, an empty canvas. For the first time in a very long time, I wasn't looking back at the rubble. I was looking forward at the clean lines of the future, at the foundation that was being poured, at the new building that was waiting to rise. And I knew with a quiet, unshakable certainty that this one I was building for myself, and this one would last.